My daughter-in-law called the police to our home. She's unstable and a danger to my children. I just looked at the officer and said, "Please come in. I have something to show you." Her lies evaporated the moment I hit play. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. Let me tell you how a perfectly ordinary Tuesday in September turned into the day I finally got my revenge on the woman who'd been systematically destroying my family for 3 years. My name is Margaret Maggie Collins. I'm 52 years old, and until this morning, I thought my biggest problem was deciding whether to make pot roast or chicken for dinner. Officer Daniel Martinez stood awkwardly in my doorway, his young face trying to maintain professional composure while clearly wishing he was anywhere else. Behind him, my daughter-in-law Carla paced frantically on my front lawn, gesticulating wildly and occasionally shouting things like, "She's completely lost it," and "My children aren't safe." The thing about Carla Davidson Collins is that she's always been an exceptional actress. When she married my son Kevin 3 years ago, she had us all fooled with her sweet Southern charm and her endless talk about family values. She baked cookies for school fundraisers, volunteered at the church, and called me Mama Maggie with such apparent affection that I actually felt guilty for my initial reservations about her. But actors always slip up eventually, and Carla's performance had been cracking for months now. "Mrs. Collins," Officer Martinez said carefully, "your daughter-in-law called our station this morning, claiming you've been exhibiting erratic behavior and making threats toward her children." I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I stepped aside and gestured for him to enter. "Officer Martinez, please come in. Can I offer you some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." Behind him, Carla's voice rose to a near shriek. "Don't you go in there alone. She's dangerous." The officer glanced back at her, then at me. I was wearing my usual Tuesday attire. Clean jeans, a yellow cardigan my late husband had bought me for Christmas, and my grandmother's pearl earrings. I looked about as dangerous as a golden retriever. "Coffee would be nice, ma'am," he said, stepping inside. I led him to my kitchen, where everything was exactly as it should be. Clean counters, fresh flowers from my garden in a mason jar, and the lingering smell of the cinnamon rolls I'd baked earlier for Kevin's lunch. This was not the home of an unstable woman. "Mrs. Collins," Officer Martinez began, pulling out a small notebook. "Can you tell me about your interactions with Mrs. Davidson Collins recently?" I poured him coffee in my best china cup and settled across from him at the kitchen table. "Well, officer, that's quite a story. But before I tell it, I think you should know that everything Carla said about me today was a lie, and I can prove it." His eyebrows raised slightly. "How's that?" I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out a small device about the size of a pack of cards. "This is a digital recorder. For the past 2 months, I've been recording every conversation I have with Carla." I could see the surprise in his eyes. "Why would you do that?" "Because," I said, setting the recorder on the table between us, "my daughter-in-law has been trying to turn my son against me, alienate me from my grandchildren, and convince everyone I know that I'm losing my mind. And I finally got tired of being the only one who knew the truth." Through the window, I could see Carla pacing faster now, occasionally glancing toward the house with what I recognized as genuine panic in her eyes. She knew exactly what I had on that recorder. "That's a very serious accusation, Mrs. Collins." "It is," I agreed, "and I have very serious evidence." I pressed play. Carla's voice filled my kitchen, crisp and clear. "Listen, you old bat. I don't care what Kevin thinks he wants. Those children are mine. This family is mine. And if you think I'm going to let some dried-up widow interfere with my plans, you're even more pathetic than I thought." Officer Martinez's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. That was just the beginning. "Habro," Officer Martinez set his coffee cup down with trembling hands, as Carla's voice continued to pour from the recorder. "Kevin's too weak to see what needs to be done, but I'm not. You're going to back off from my family, or I'll make sure everyone knows you're losing your mind." I watched his face carefully as the recording played. This was exactly what I'd been waiting for. A witness who couldn't be manipulated by Carla's tears or convinced that I was just a bitter old woman making things up. The recording was from last Thursday. Carla had come over while Kevin was at work, supposedly to pick up some toys the kids had left behind. But I'd learned to recognize her hunting expeditions by then. "You see, officer," I said quietly, pausing the recording, This conversation happened in my living room. Carla thought she was safe because Kevin wasn't here, and she assumed I'd never tell him what she really said to me. Jesus, he muttered, then caught himself. Excuse me, ma'am? I smiled. I've heard worse. There's more, if you're interested. Through the window, Carla had stopped pacing and was standing perfectly still, staring at my house with the look of someone who had just realized the ground was shifting beneath her feet. I forwarded to another conversation. This one, from 2 weeks ago. Carla's voice again, but this time with a different tone entirely, calculating rather than angry. I've been talking to some people at the country club, Maggie. They're all saying the same thing about you. How you've been forgetting conversations, repeating yourself, getting confused about dates. It's such a shame when someone your age starts declining. On the recording, you could hear my voice responding calmly. What people at the country club, Carla? Oh, you know. Jennifer Morrison, Beth Caldwell. They're all concerned about you. What Carla didn't know was that I'd had lunch with both Jennifer and Beth the day before that conversation. Neither of them had mentioned anything about my mental state, because neither of them had noticed any decline. They had, however, mentioned that Carla had been asking a lot of questions about early onset dementia and how families handle difficult situations with aging relatives. Officer Martinez was shaking his head slowly. Mrs. Collins, how long has this been going on? The recordings? 2 months. But the campaign against me started about 6 months after Carla married Kevin. It was subtle at first. Little comments about how I seemed tired, suggestions that maybe I shouldn't drive at night anymore, conversations about how hard it must be for me to live alone in this big house. I had been stupid enough to think she was being caring. She's been building a case, I continued, planting seeds with Kevin, with the neighbors, with anyone who would listen. Maggie's getting older. Maggie seems confused lately. Maybe Maggie shouldn't be around the children so much. The officer looked genuinely disturbed. That's psychological abuse. It's also brilliant, I admitted grudgingly. Carla's a pediatric nurse. She knows exactly how to sound concerned and professional. And she chose the perfect victim, a widow with no close family nearby, someone whose word might seem less reliable than that of a young mother. I pressed play again. This time, it was a conversation from 3 weeks ago, after Kevin had gently suggested that maybe I should consider simplifying my living situation. Carla's voice was pure honey. Kevin, your mother's been calling me at work, asking the same questions over and over. Yesterday, she called 3 times to ask what time we were coming for dinner, even though we'd already told her we couldn't make it. That was a complete lie. I had called once to confirm they couldn't come, so I could invite my neighbor Grace instead. She's also been telling the children some strange stories. Yesterday, Emma came home asking why Grandma Maggie said their daddy was going to take them away. Another lie. I had never said anything of the kind. Officer Martinez looked at me with something approaching admiration. How did you know to start recording? I didn't know. I suspected, but it was my granddaughter who gave me the proof I needed. Emma, Kevin's 8-year-old daughter, had spent the night with me about 10 weeks ago. During breakfast, she'd asked me why I told Daddy I didn't want to see them anymore. When I explained that I had never said such a thing, Emma looked confused. But Mommy said you called and said you were too tired for visitors and that we shouldn't bother you so much. That's when I knew for certain that Carla was lying to everyone about everything. I started recording the next day. Mrs. Collins, Officer Martinez said carefully, do you have any idea why your daughter-in-law would want to isolate you from your family? I smiled, but there was no humor in it. Oh, officer, that's where this story gets really interesting. Money, I said simply, letting the word hang in the air between us. It always comes down to money, doesn't it? Officer Martinez leaned forward, clearly invested now in understanding the full scope of what he'd walked into. You see, when my husband died 5 years ago, he left me very well provided for. The house is paid off. I have a substantial savings account, and there's a life insurance policy that Kevin will inherit when I die. About $300,000 all told. The officer whistled low. Carla knows this because Kevin told her, back when they were planning their wedding and discussing their future financial security. At the time, I thought it was sweet that she seemed so interested in family history and traditions. I reached for another cookie from the plate between us, mainly to keep my hands busy. What Kevin doesn't know is that his wife has been visiting estate attorneys. How do you know that? Because my friend Dorothy works at Harrington, Wells and Associates downtown. She mentioned seeing Carla there several times over the past few months. When Dorothy asked if everything was all right with the family, Carla said she was helping me with some paperwork since I'd been having trouble managing my affairs. Officer Martinez's expression darkened. More lies. Exactly. So I did some investigating of my own. Turns out Carla has been researching guardianship laws, specifically how to have someone declared mentally incompetent. I let that sink in for a moment. Through the window, I could see Carla had her phone out now, probably calling Kevin to tell him some story about how the police were at his mother's house, and she was so worried about my mental state. The plan was elegant, really. Isolate me from my support system, document my supposed decline, and eventually petition the court to have Kevin appointed as my guardian. Once that happened, she'd have control over my finances, my medical decisions, and my living situation. That's... Officer Martinez struggled for the right word. Evil? I suggested helpfully. Yes, I thought so too. I forwarded the recording to a conversation from just last week. Carla's voice was softer this time, the tone she used when she was planning something. Kevin, I think we need to seriously consider what's best for your mother. She called me yesterday asking if I knew where she put her grocery list. And when I said I didn't know, she got angry and accused me of moving her things around. I had never made such a call. And yesterday, when I picked up the kids, she seemed confused about what day it was. She kept saying it was Thursday when it was clearly Wednesday. It had been Thursday. I'm starting to think she might need more supervision than we realized. Maybe we should look into some options for assisted living, or at least consider having someone check on her more regularly. On the recording, you could hear Kevin's voice, distant but troubled. I know you're right, but it's hard to think about Mom not being independent anymore. I understand. Honey, but we have to think about her safety, and frankly, we need to think about the children's safety too. What if she forgets to turn off the stove when they're visiting? What if she gets confused and takes them somewhere and can't remember how to get home? Officer Martinez looked physically sick. She was manipulating your son. Masterfully, I agreed. Kevin loves me, but he also trusts his wife. When someone you love tells you the same story over and over, presented with apparent concern and backed up by specific examples, you start to believe it. I paused the recording and met the officer's eyes. The brilliant part was that Carla never said I was mentally incompetent. She just planted dozens of little seeds of doubt. Maybe Maggie's getting forgetful. Maybe we should keep a closer eye on her. Maybe she's not as sharp as she used to be. How long would it have taken for her plan to work? Not long. I'd guess another month or two of documented incidents, maybe a carefully staged emergency where I appeared confused or disoriented, and then Kevin would have started seriously considering guardianship proceedings. My phone rang. Kevin's number. That'll be my son, I said to Officer Martinez. Carla's probably told him there's been some kind of incident and he needs to rush over here to manage the situation. I answered the phone. Hi, sweetheart. Mom, are you okay? Carla called and said the police are at your house. What happened? Everything's fine, Kevin. Officer Martinez is here because Carla called the police station this morning, claiming I was dangerous and unstable. There was a pause. She said, "What? Why don't you come over? I think there are some things we need to discuss as a family." I'm leaving work now. Mom, are you sure you're all right? I'm better than I've been in months, honey. I'll see you soon. After I hung up, Officer Martinez said, "Are you going to tell your son about the recordings?" I looked out the window at Carla, who was now pacing frantically and talking rapidly into her phone. "Oh yes," I said. "I'm going to tell him everything. But first, I had one more recording to play." This last recording, I told Officer Martinez, is from 3 days ago. It's the one that made me realize Carla wasn't just planning to have me declared incompetent. She was planning to have me committed. I fast-forwarded to the relevant section. Carla's voice was crisp and professional. "Dr. Henderson, this is Carla Collins. I'm calling about my mother-in-law, Margaret Collins. I'm a pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital, and I'm very concerned about some behaviors I've been observing." My blood still ran cold listening to this conversation, which Carla had conducted from my own kitchen while I was supposedly napping upstairs. She's been exhibiting signs of paranoid delusions lately. Yesterday, she accused me of moving her things around and claimed I was trying to make her look confused. She's also been hoarding medications and seems convinced that someone is trying to hurt her. Officer Martinez's face had gone completely pale. I know you can't diagnose over the phone, Dr. Henderson, but as a healthcare professional, I'm concerned she might be experiencing early-stage dementia with paranoid features. Her son is my husband, and we're very worried about her safety and the safety of our children when they visit. I paused the recording. Dr. Henderson is a psychiatrist who specializes in geriatric mental health. He's also someone Carla knew through her work connections. She was setting up a professional consultation. Worse than that, she was creating medical documentation of my supposed mental decline, using her credentials as a nurse to add weight to her claims. The truly sick part was how well Carla understood the system. As a pediatric nurse, she knew exactly which symptoms to report, which terminology to use, and how to present herself as a concerned family member rather than someone with ulterior motives. I played the rest of the conversation. We'd like to schedule an evaluation, Dr. Henderson, preferably something we could arrange without her knowledge initially, since she's very resistant to the idea that anything is wrong. How soon could we set something up? I'm concerned that waiting might put everyone at risk. Officer Martinez set down his coffee cup. Mrs. Collins, this is criminal. She was building a false medical case against you. And if Dr. Henderson had agreed to see me based on Carla's report, if he'd found any signs of age-related forgetfulness or normal cognitive changes, it would have been documented as supporting evidence for her claims. I could see the officer working through the implications. A psychiatric evaluation suggesting cognitive decline, combined with months of documented incidents and concerned reports from family members, would have been more than enough for a guardianship petition. The beautiful thing about Carla's plan, I continued, was that it would have looked completely legitimate. A loving daughter-in-law concerned about an aging woman's safety, a devoted son reluctantly accepting that his mother needed help, medical professionals confirming that intervention was necessary. My front door chimed. Through the window, I could see Kevin's truck in the driveway. He was walking quickly toward the house, his face tight with worry. Mrs. Collins, Officer Martinez said, I need to ask you something directly. Are you experiencing any memory issues, confusion, or other symptoms that might explain your daughter-in-law's concerns? I smiled. Officer, 2 months ago I might have wondered about that myself. Carla was very good at making me question my own perceptions. But no, I'm not experiencing any cognitive decline. How can you be certain? Because after I started recording our conversations, I also started documenting everything else. I keep detailed notes about my daily activities, my conversations, my appointments. I had my doctor run a complete physical and cognitive assessment. I even took one of those online memory tests. I pulled out a folder from the kitchen drawer. Dr. Williams confirmed that I'm in excellent physical and mental health for a woman my age. My memory, reasoning ability, and judgment are all well within normal ranges. Kevin's footsteps were on the porch now. More importantly, I continued, I've been keeping careful track of every incident Carla claimed happened. The confused phone calls, the forgotten conversations, the strange behavior with the children. Officer Martinez, I have documentation proving that every single incident she reported was either completely fabricated or a deliberate misrepresentation of normal events. Kevin knocked on the door. Come in, sweetheart, I called out. We're in the kitchen. My son appeared in the doorway, his dark hair disheveled and his face creased with worry. At 32, Kevin looked remarkably like his father had at that age, with the same kind eyes and gentle demeanor that had made him such an easy target for someone like Carla. Mom, what's going on? Carla said. Kevin, I interrupted gently. I'd like you to sit down. There are some things about your wife that you need to know. He looked between Officer Martinez and me, clearly trying to understand what kind of situation he'd walked into. Is someone going to tell me why there's a police officer in my mother's kitchen? Your wife called the police this morning, Officer Martinez said carefully, claiming that your mother was exhibiting dangerous and unstable behavior. Kevin's face went white. She said what? I reached across the table and took my son's hand. Honey, for the past several months, Carla has been lying to you about me. She's been lying to everyone about me, and I can prove it. I placed the recorder on the table in front of him. Before you listen to this, I want you to know that I love you, and nothing that's about to happen changes that. Then I pressed play. Kevin's face went through a series of expressions as he listened to his wife's voice detailing her real feelings about me and her plans for our family. Confusion gave way to disbelief. then to anger, and finally to something that looked like grief. "Turn it off," he said quietly after the third recorded conversation. I stopped the recording and waited. Officer Martinez discreetly checked his phone, giving us a moment of family privacy. "How long?" Kevin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How long have I been recording?" 2 months. "How long has this been going on?" "Since about 6 months after your wedding." He put his head in his hands. "Jesus, Mom, why didn't you tell me?" It was the question I'd been dreading, because the answer revealed how thoroughly Carla had succeeded in undermining our relationship. Because she made me doubt myself first, and then she made me doubt whether you'd believe me. Kevin looked up sharply. "I would have believed you." "Would you?" "Honey, 3 weeks ago you suggested I might want to consider simplifying my living situation. 2 weeks ago, you asked if I was taking my medications regularly. Last week you wanted to know if I'd thought about having someone check on me during the day." Recognition dawned in his eyes. "She told me you were showing signs of confusion. She told you a lot of things, and because you love us both, you tried to find a middle ground. You started watching me for signs of decline, and she made sure you found them." Officer Martinez cleared his throat gently. "Mr. Collins, I hate to interrupt, but there's something else you should know. Your wife wasn't just trying to make your mother appear confused. She was actively working to have her declared mentally incompetent." I showed Kevin the folder with my medical records and documentation. I started keeping detailed notes about everything once I realized what was happening. Every conversation, every activity, every interaction with your wife. I also had Dr. Williams run a complete evaluation. Kevin flipped through the pages, his expression growing more troubled with each document. "Dr. Williams found no evidence of cognitive decline whatsoever," I continued. "In fact, he was impressed with my mental acuity and organizational skills." "The recording where she calls Dr. Henderson," Officer Martinez added, "that's attempted fraud. She was using her professional credentials to create false medical documentation." Kevin was quiet for a long time, processing everything. Outside, I could see Carla had moved closer to the house and appeared to be trying to listen at the window. Finally, he spoke. "What was her endgame, Mom? What did she want?" "Financial control," I said simply. "Once I was declared incompetent and you were appointed as my guardian, she'd have access to my accounts, my property, my insurance policies, everything. But I would never—" "Kevin, you're a good man with a generous heart. If your wife convinced you that I needed expensive care, or that the children needed college funds, or that the family needed a bigger house, would you have said no?" His silence was answer enough. "She was patient," I admitted. "This wasn't a get-rich-quick scheme. This was a long-term plan to gradually gain control over our family's financial resources while positioning herself as the devoted daughter-in-law who was just looking out for everyone's best interests." My phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. "You're going to regret this." I showed it to Officer Martinez, who immediately looked toward the window where Carla was standing. "Mr. Collins," the officer said, "I think we need to have a conversation with your wife." Kevin stood up slowly, like a man who'd aged 10 years in the past hour. "Officer Martinez, what are my mother's options here?" "Well, based on what I've heard today, there are several potential charges we could pursue. Harassment, fraud, filing false police reports, possibly even elder abuse." I held up my hand. "Before we go down that road, I'd like to try something else first." Both men looked at me with curiosity. "Kevin, I want you to call your wife and ask her to come inside. Tell her the officer needs to speak with both of you about the situation." "Mom, what are you planning?" I smiled, but it wasn't entirely pleasant. "I'm going to give Carla a chance to tell the truth. One last opportunity to be honest with you about what she's been doing." Officer Martinez looked skeptical. "Mrs. Collins, I don't think she's going to confess. She will if she thinks confessing is her best option for damage control." I had been studying Carla for 3 years. I knew exactly how her mind worked when she felt cornered. She'd calculate the odds, determine the most advantageous position, and then present whatever version of events served her interests best. But this time, I was going to control the narrative. Kevin pulled out his phone reluctantly. "Carla, can you come inside? Officer Martinez needs to speak with both of us." Through the window, I watched her face as she listened to Kevin's request. Even from a distance, I could see her mind working, trying to determine what story would serve her best. She was about to find out that I'd finally learned to play her game, and I was better at it than she was. Carla entered my kitchen like a woman walking into battle. She'd composed herself during the walk from the yard to the house, arranging her features into an expression of concerned worry. Her blonde hair was perfect, her makeup flawless despite the morning's drama, and she carried herself with the confident posture of someone who believed she still controlled the situation. "Kevin, thank goodness you're here," she said, rushing to him and placing a protective hand on his arm. "I've been so worried about your mother's behavior lately." She glanced at Officer Martinez and me with what appeared to be nervous concern. "Officer, I hope you understand that calling the police wasn't something I did lightly. But when someone you care about starts exhibiting dangerous signs, you have to put safety first. I had to admire her performance. If I didn't know better, I'd believe she was genuinely concerned about my welfare." "Mrs. Davidson Collins," Officer Martinez said formally, "your mother-in-law has made some serious allegations about your behavior toward her." Carla's eyes widened with apparent shock. "Allegations? What kind of allegations?" "She claims you've been systematically lying about her mental state to family members and medical professionals." For just a moment, something flickered across Carla's face. Not surprise, calculation. She was rapidly assessing this new information and determining her best response strategy. "Officer, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding," she said, her voice taking on the professional tone she used at the hospital. "As a healthcare worker, I've been genuinely concerned about some changes I've observed in Margaret's behavior. If she's interpreting my concern as something malicious, that might actually be indicative of the paranoid thinking patterns we sometimes see in early cognitive decline." Brilliant. She was using my accusation as evidence of my supposed mental illness. Kevin looked between us, clearly struggling to reconcile the wife he loved with the evidence he'd just heard. "Carla," he said carefully, "Mom played me some recordings." "Recordings?" Carla's voice rose with what sounded like genuine alarm. "Kevin, if your mother has been secretly recording private family conversations, that's extremely concerning behavior. That's exactly the kind of paranoid activity I've been worried about." She turned to Officer Martinez. "This is what I mean about the changes I've been observing. The suspicion, the secretive behavior, the accusations against family members who are trying to help." I almost applauded. Carla was turning my evidence into proof of her claims. It was a masterful deflection, but I hadn't survived 52 years on this earth without learning a thing or two about fighting dirty when necessary. "Carla," I said pleasantly, "that's fascinating. So you're saying that recording family conversations is paranoid behavior?" "Of course it is. Normal people don't secretly record their loved ones." I reached into my kitchen drawer and pulled out a second device. "Then I'm curious how you'd characterize this." Carla's face went dead white. "This," I continued, "is a voice recorder I found hidden behind the coffee maker last month. Strange place for it to end up, don't you think?" The silence in the room was deafening. "You see, Officer Martinez, Carla's been recording our conversations too. The difference is that she's been doing it without my knowledge or consent. I had found the recorder 3 weeks ago while cleaning. At first, I'd assumed Kevin had dropped it and forgotten about it. But when I examined it more closely, I found hours of recorded conversations between Carla and me. Conversations that had been carefully edited to remove context and make my responses seem confused or inappropriate. But unlike my recordings, which capture complete, unedited conversations, Carla's recordings appear to have been manipulated." I pressed play on her device. My voice filled the kitchen, mid-sentence. "Don't remember saying that. Confused about what day. Can't find my keys anywhere." Out of context, I sounded exactly like someone experiencing memory problems. Officer Martinez looked at Carla with undisguised disgust. "You've been secretly recording and editing conversations to make your mother-in-law appear incompetent?" Carla opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again like a fish gasping for air. Kevin stared at his wife as if he'd never seen her before. "Carla, what the hell is this?" Finally, she found her voice. "I was documenting concerning behaviors for her own protection. Medical professionals need specific examples when evaluating cognitive decline." "No," I said firmly. "You were manufacturing evidence, and when that wasn't enough, you started escalating to more dramatic measures." I turned to Officer Martinez. The phone call to Dr. Henderson wasn't Carla's first attempt to create professional documentation of my supposed mental illness. She's also contacted my insurance company asking about coverage for in-home psychiatric care, and she's been in touch with 3 different assisted living facilities asking about their memory care programs. Carla's professional composure was finally cracking. Margaret is twisting everything. Yes, I've been exploring options for her care because I'm concerned about her safety. That's what responsible family members do. Responsible family members, I said, don't lie to police officers. They don't forge medical documentation, and they certainly don't threaten elderly relatives. I played the recording of Carla's threat to make everyone believe I was losing my mind. Kevin listened to his wife's voice with growing horror. When the recording ended, he looked at Carla with a mixture of disgust and grief that broke my heart. "How long?" he asked quietly. "Kevin, you have to understand. How long have you been planning this?" Carla looked around the room desperately, seeking some way to salvage the situation. When she realized there wasn't one, something fundamental shifted in her expression. The mask finally fell away completely. "Since before we got married," she said flatly. "Did you really think I was interested in a middle school math teacher for his sparkling personality?" The words hit Kevin like a physical blow. And that's when I realized Carla had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Kevin's face went completely blank, the way it used to when he was a child and someone had hurt him so badly that his mind simply couldn't process it. I watched my son's heart break in real time, and for a moment I wanted to take everything back, to pretend none of this had ever happened, just to spare him this pain. But it was too late for that now. "Before we got married," Kevin repeated slowly. "You planned this before we got married." Carla seemed to realize she'd revealed too much because she immediately tried to backtrack. "Kevin, that's not what I meant. I was upset. I misspoke." "No." His voice was quiet but firm. "You didn't misspeak. You told the truth for the first time since I've known you." Officer Martinez was taking notes now, his expression professional, but his eyes reflecting the same disgust I was feeling. "Mrs. Davidson Collins," he said, "I need to ask you directly. Did you marry Mr. Collins with the intention of gaining access to his family's financial resources through fraudulent means?" For a moment, I thought Carla might continue trying to lie her way out of the situation. But something in Kevin's face, the absolute devastation there, seemed to convince her that the game was finally over. "You want the truth?" she asked, her voice taking on a bitter edge. "Fine, here's the truth." She turned to Kevin with an expression that was almost pitying. "I met you at that hospital charity function, remember? You were so sweet, talking about your students and your mother and how close your family was. And when you mentioned that your mom was well off and that you were her only heir, I thought, here's a nice man who'll give me the stability I deserve." Kevin flinched as if she'd slapped him. "The original plan was simple," Carla continued, her tone becoming almost conversational. "Marry you, be the perfect daughter-in-law for a few years, and eventually inherit everything when Margaret died naturally. I was patient. I could wait." "But then what changed?" Officer Martinez asked. Carla laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor. "Margaret changed. She didn't decline the way older people are supposed to. She stayed sharp, stayed active, stayed healthy. And I realized she could live another 20 or 30 years. She looked at me with something approaching respect. "You're tougher than I gave you credit for, Margaret. I'll give you that." "So you decided to speed up the timeline," I said. "I decided to take control of the situation. The incompetency angle would have worked perfectly. Kevin would have become your guardian. I would have convinced him that expensive care was necessary, and gradually we would have gained access to your resources for your own good." Kevin stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You manipulated me. You made me doubt my own mother. I gave you a chance at financial security that you never would have achieved on a teacher's salary," Carla shot back. "You should be thanking me." The sheer audacity of that statement left everyone speechless for a moment. "Mrs. Davidson Collins," Officer Martinez said, "you've just confessed to multiple felonies: fraud, elder abuse, filing false police reports, conspiracy." "Prove it," Carla interrupted. "Yes, I recorded some conversations. Yes, I was concerned about Margaret's mental state. Yes, I made some phone calls to medical professionals. But nothing I did was illegal. She was right, and she knew it. The recordings were damning but not necessarily criminal. The phone calls to doctors could be explained as genuine concern. Even the false police report would be difficult to prosecute if she claimed she genuinely believed I was dangerous. Carla had been very careful to operate in legal gray areas, but I had been preparing for this moment for 2 months. Actually, Carla, I said pleasantly, you did do something illegal. I reached into my kitchen drawer one more time and pulled out a stack of papers. These are copies of medical records you accessed using your hospital credentials to research my health history. Dr. Williams provided them after I explained that someone had been improperly accessing my files. Carla's face went ashen. Computer fraud is a felony in this state, Officer Martinez noted, examining the documents. Unauthorized access to medical records carries significant penalties. There's also this, I continued, producing another document. A copy of the application you submitted to Riverside Memorial requesting a psychiatric consultation for an elderly family member experiencing paranoid delusions. You listed yourself as the referring medical professional and provided false information about my symptoms and medical history. And this, I said, placing a final piece of paper on the table, is documentation showing that you used your hospital computer system to research guardianship procedures, legal precedents for cognitive decline cases, and estate planning strategies. All during work hours, all using credentials that don't authorize that kind of research. Carla stared at the evidence with the expression of someone watching her entire world collapse. Kevin looked at me with something approaching awe. Mom, how did you— Your wife isn't the only one who knows how to build a case, sweetheart. The difference is that my evidence is all legitimate. Officer Martinez was already reaching for his handcuffs. Mrs. Davidson Collins, you're under arrest for computer fraud, filing false medical reports, and elder abuse. You have the right to remain silent. As he read Carla her rights, she looked at Kevin one last time. You'll never find anyone else who'll put up with your boring life and your clingy mother. Kevin met her gaze steadily. Good. But I knew this was far from over. Carla was resourceful, intelligent, and completely without conscience. Even facing criminal charges, she'd be looking for ways to minimize the damage and maximize her advantage. I just hadn't expected her final card to be quite so vicious. 20 minutes after Officer Martinez led Carla away in handcuffs, my kitchen felt strangely quiet. Kevin sat at the table, staring at his coffee cup like it might contain answers to questions he hadn't even figured out how to ask yet. Mom, he said finally, I'm so sorry. You have nothing to apologize for, sweetheart. I do, though. I believed her. I actually started to think you might be losing your memory. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. She's very good at what she does. She fooled me for months, too. But you figured it out. Eventually. But not before she did some real damage. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both processing everything that had happened. I was just starting to think the worst was behind us when my phone rang. Kevin's number was calling my phone, even though Kevin was sitting right in front of me. That's my phone, Kevin said, checking his pocket with confusion. I answered cautiously. Hello? Margaret, this is Dr. Patricia Williams from Child Protective Services. The voice was professional but concerned. I'm calling about a report we received this morning regarding the children in your son's care. My stomach dropped. What kind of report? We received information suggesting that the children may be in an unsafe environment due to domestic violence in the home and concerns about their father's mental stability following a family crisis. I looked at Kevin, whose face had gone white as he realized what was happening. Dr. Williams, can you tell me who filed this report? I'm not able to share that information, but I can tell you that it came from someone identifying themselves as a mandated reporter with medical credentials. Carla, even from jail. She was still playing games. Dr. Williams, I think there's been a serious misunderstanding. The person who filed that report was arrested this morning for elder abuse and filing false reports. Ma'am, regardless of the source, we're required to investigate any report involving potential harm to children. I'll need to speak with your son and assess the children's living situation. Kevin grabbed the phone. This is Kevin Collins. Those are my children you're talking about. Mr. Collins, I understand this is stressful, but I need you to bring Emma and Tyler to our office for interviews this afternoon. We also need to conduct a home visit to ensure their environment is safe. After Kevin hung up, He looked at me with panic in his eyes. "Mom, what if they take the kids?" "They won't," I said firmly, though privately I was worried. Carla had timed this perfectly. Child Protective Services investigations could drag on for weeks or months, and even unfounded reports could disrupt a family's life significantly. "We need to call a lawyer," Kevin said, already reaching for his phone. "We need to do better than that," I replied. "We need to go on the offensive." I had learned something important over the past few months. When someone is systematically trying to destroy your life, defense isn't enough. Sometimes you have to fight back with everything you've got. "Kevin, call your principal and explain that you'll need the rest of the week off for a family emergency. Then call Emma and Tyler's school and let them know what's happening so they're prepared if CPS contacts them." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to make some phone calls of my own." The first call was to my lawyer, James Morrison, who'd been handling my affairs since Harold died. I explained the situation and asked him to represent Kevin in the CPS investigation. The second call was to Dr. Williams, my physician, to request copies of my complete medical records and a written statement confirming my mental competency. The third call was to Detective Sarah Chen, who'd taken over the case from Officer Martinez. "Detective Chen, this is Margaret Collins. I wanted to give you a heads up that Carla Davidson Collins has filed a false report with Child Protective Services as retaliation for her arrest." "What kind of report?" "She's claiming there's domestic violence in my son's home and that he's mentally unstable. This is clearly an attempt to maintain control over the family, even from jail." Detective Chen sighed. "Mrs. Collins, I wish I could say this was unusual, but manipulative people often escalate when they're caught. Do you have evidence that the CPS report is false?" "I have extensive documentation of her pattern of filing false reports. I also have character references for my son from his employer, his children's teachers, and community members. I'll contact CPS and make sure they're aware that the person who filed the report is facing criminal charges for similar behavior." The fourth call was the most important one. Channel 7 News. "This is Amanda Rodriguez." "Ms. Rodriguez, my name is Margaret Collins. I believe you'd be interested in a story about elder abuse, family fraud, and false police reports." "I'm listening." "This morning, my daughter-in-law was arrested for attempting to have me declared mentally incompetent so she could gain control of my finances. As retaliation, she's now filed false reports with Child Protective Services targeting my son and grandchildren. That's definitely newsworthy. Can you provide documentation? I have recordings, medical records, police reports, and a very clear timeline of fraudulent behavior. When can we meet?" I looked at Kevin, who was listening to my side of the conversation with growing amazement. "How about this afternoon? I think it's time this story got the attention it deserves." After I hung up, Kevin stared at me. "Mom, you're going public with this?" "Honey, your wife spent months building a case against me using lies and manipulation. Now she's trying to use the same tactics against you and the children." I stood up and straightened my shoulders. It's time someone showed her what a real campaign looks like. I had been playing defense for 3 years, letting Carla control the narrative and set the terms of engagement. But I was done being the victim in this story. It was time to show everyone who the real Margaret Collins was. The Channel 7 News interview was scheduled for 4 p.m., which gave us time to prepare our strategy. Kevin picked up Emma and Tyler from school early, explaining that they'd be staying with my neighbor Grace for a few days while we sorted out some family issues. "Are we in trouble, Daddy?" Emma asked, her 8-year-old face creased with worry. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and other grown-ups have to help fix them. But you and Tyler are perfectly safe." Tyler, who was only 5, seemed less concerned about the abstract concept of trouble and more interested in the fact that Grace had promised to make chocolate chip cookies. As the children played in Grace's backyard, Kevin and I sat in my living room organizing our documentation. I had spent the morning creating a comprehensive timeline of Carla's behavior, complete with dates, witnesses, and supporting evidence. "Mom," Kevin said, reviewing the paperwork, "this is incredibly thorough. When did you have time to put all this together?" "I've been working on it for weeks. I knew this day would come eventually." The truth was, I'd been preparing for war long before I'd started recording Carla's conversations. Once I'd recognized the pattern of her behavior, I'd begun documenting everything with the systematic attention to detail that had served me well during my 30-year career as a school administrator. Amanda Rodriguez arrived at 3:30, accompanied by a cameraman and a producer. She was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 30s, with sharp eyes and the kind of confident demeanor that suggested she'd covered more than her share of difficult stories. "Mrs. Collins, thank you for reaching out to us. Stories like this are important, but they're also sensitive. I want to make sure we handle everything appropriately." "I appreciate that, Ms. Rodriguez. I'm not interested in creating a media circus. I just want people to understand what elder abuse actually looks like and how sophisticated these schemes can be." We spent an hour going through the timeline, the recordings, and the documentation. Amanda's expression grew more serious as she realized the scope of what Carla had attempted. "This is remarkable," she said finally. "The level of planning and manipulation involved is extraordinary. How do you feel about going public with such personal family details?" I thought about that question carefully. A week ago, the idea of discussing my private life on television would have horrified me. But Carla had already made our family business public by involving the police, medical professionals, and now Child Protective Services. "Ms. Rodriguez, if my story prevents even one other family from going through this, it's worth whatever embarrassment I might experience." The interview itself was easier than I'd expected. Amanda asked thoughtful questions and let me tell the story in my own words. I played selected portions of the recordings, explained Carla's methodology, and described the impact her campaign had on our family. "What surprised you most about your daughter-in-law's behavior?" Amanda asked. "How patient she was," I replied. "This wasn't a crime of passion or desperation. This was a carefully planned long-term strategy. She was willing to invest years of her life in this deception. What would you say to other families who might be experiencing something similar? Trust your instincts. If someone in your family is consistently trying to make you doubt your own perceptions, if they're isolating you from your support systems, if they're suddenly very interested in your finances or medical decisions, pay attention to those red flags." The interview aired on the 6 o'clock news that evening. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My phone rang constantly for the next 2 hours. Friends, neighbors, former colleagues, and complete strangers called to offer support, share similar experiences, or ask for advice. Several people mentioned that they'd had concerns about Carla but hadn't known how to express them. Mrs. Thompson from down the street called to say that Carla had approached her months ago, asking questions about my daily routine and whether I seemed confused or forgetful. Mr. Davis from the hardware store mentioned that Carla had been asking about home security systems, specifically ones that could monitor elderly residents. Even more disturbing were the calls from other potential victims. 3 different women contacted me to describe similar situations with family members who were systematically undermining their independence and credibility. But the most important call came at 8:47 p.m. "Mrs. Collins, this is Dr. Patricia Williams from Child Protective Services. I've just seen your news interview, and I wanted to personally apologize for the stress our investigation has caused your family." "Dr. Williams, you were just doing your job." "Perhaps, but we should have been more thorough in vetting the source of the report. Detective Chen contacted us this afternoon with additional information about Mrs. Davidson Collins, and in light of everything we've learned, we're closing our investigation immediately." "What does that mean for my son and grandchildren?" "It means they can go home tonight and resume their normal lives. We'll be flagging Mrs. Davidson Collins in our system to prevent any future false reports from being taken at face value." After I hung up, Kevin looked at me with amazement. "Mom, how did you know the news interview would work?" "Because bullies count on their victims staying silent. They count on shame and embarrassment and the desire to keep family problems private. Once you shine a light on their behavior, once you refuse to be ashamed of being targeted, their power disappears." It was nearly 10 p.m. when Detective Chen called with an update on Carla's situation. "Mrs. Collins, I wanted you to know that Mrs. Davidson Collins has been denied bail pending trial. The judge considered her recent attempt to manipulate Child Protective Services as evidence that she poses a continued threat to your family. How long will she be in jail? With the charges we're filing and her confession on record, she's looking at significant prison time. Her lawyer is already talking about a plea deal." I hung up and looked at Kevin. who was sitting on my couch watching the 10 o'clock news replay the story of our family's ordeal. "It's over," I said. "Is it really?" I thought about that question. Carla was in jail, the CPS investigation was closed, and our story was public. But I knew that the real work of healing our family was just beginning. "The legal part is over," I said. "The rest is up to us." But first, there was one more thing I needed to do. 3 weeks later, I stood in courtroom 3B watching Carla Davidson Collins accept a plea deal that would send her to prison for 7 years. She looked smaller somehow, diminished without her makeup and professional attire. The orange jumpsuit was definitely not her color. When the judge asked if she had anything to say before sentencing, Carla stood and faced our side of the courtroom. For a moment, I thought she might actually apologize. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and steady, "I maintain that my actions were motivated by genuine concern for family welfare. I believe that with more time and better communication, this entire situation could have been resolved without legal intervention. Even now, facing 7 years in prison, she couldn't admit she'd done anything wrong." The judge was not impressed. "Mrs. Davidson Collins, you have manipulated medical professionals, law enforcement, and social services in a systematic campaign of fraud and abuse. Your lack of remorse is as troubling as your original crimes." After the sentencing, Kevin and I walked out of the courthouse together. The children were at school, blissfully unaware that this particular chapter of their lives was finally closing. "How are you doing?" I asked Kevin as we sat on a bench outside the courthouse. "Honestly, I feel like I've been living in someone else's life for 3 years. I keep waiting for someone to tell me this was all a misunderstanding." No misunderstanding, just a very expensive education in human nature. Kevin had filed for divorce the week after Carla's arrest. The proceedings were complicated by the fact that she was in jail, but his lawyer expected everything to be finalized within a few months. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course. How did you stay so calm through all of this? If someone had been systematically trying to destroy my life, I think I would have lost my mind." I thought about that question. The truth was, there had been moments when I'd questioned my own sanity, when I'd wondered if maybe Carla was right and I was losing my grip on reality. I think it helped that I had a purpose beyond just defending myself. Once I realized what she was doing, I became determined to protect you and the children from her manipulation. That gave me something to fight for instead of just something to fight against. Still, the planning you did, the way you gathered evidence and built your case, where did that come from? I smiled. "Sweetheart, I didn't survive 30 years as a high school principal without learning how to deal with manipulative people. Carla was more sophisticated than most teenagers, but the fundamental tactics were the same." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching lawyers and clients hurry up and down the courthouse steps. "What happens now?" Kevin asked. "Now we go home. You and the children move back into your house. I go back to my quiet retirement, and we all try to figure out what normal looks like. Will you be okay? Living alone, I mean?" I looked at my son, this good man who'd been so thoroughly deceived by someone he'd trusted completely, and felt a surge of pride in how he'd handled everything once he'd learned the truth. "Kevin, I've been taking care of myself for a long time, but more importantly, I've learned that I'm stronger than I thought I was. Carla spent months trying to convince everyone that I was weak and confused and unable to manage my own life. Turns out, she was wrong about everything." That evening, I sat in my kitchen drinking tea and reading through the stack of letters I'd received since the news story aired. Most were supportive, but several were from people sharing their own experiences with family financial abuse. One letter particularly caught my attention. It was from a woman in the next county whose adult son had been gradually gaining control over her finances by convincing her that she needed help managing her affairs. She'd seen my interview and realized that she was being manipulated. I picked up my phone and called her. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Margaret Collins. I received your letter today." "Oh my goodness, Mrs. Collins, I can't believe you called me. I wanted you to know that you're not alone, and that recognizing what's happening is the first step towards stopping it." We talked for over an hour. By the end of the conversation, Mrs. Patterson had agreed to contact Adult Protective Services and had asked me to recommend a lawyer. After I hung up, I realized that this was what I wanted to do with whatever time I had left. Not just survive Carla's attack on my life, but use what I'd learned to help other people who were facing similar situations. I opened my laptop and began typing. My name is Margaret Collins, and 3 months ago my daughter-in-law tried to have me declared mentally incompetent so she could steal my life savings. This is what I learned about fighting back. 2 hours later, I had the beginning of what would eventually become a comprehensive guide to recognizing and responding to elder financial abuse. My phone rang. Kevin's number. Mom, I just wanted to say thank you. For what? For being strong enough to fight back. For protecting our family, for showing me what real courage looks like. Kevin, you don't need to thank me for protecting my own family. Yes, I do. Another person might have just accepted what was happening, might have let Carla win. But you didn't give up, even when things looked hopeless. After we hung up, I walked through my house, appreciating the silence and peace that I'd almost lost. Tomorrow, Emma and Tyler would come over after school for their regular Wednesday visit. This weekend, Kevin and I were planning to take them to the zoo. Normal things. Family things. The kind of life Carla had tried to steal from all of us. I settled into my favorite chair with my tea and looked out at the garden Harold and I had planted together 30 years ago. The roses were blooming beautifully this year. At 52, I was starting a new chapter of my life. Not as the victim of someone else's greed and manipulation, but as someone who'd learned exactly how strong she could be when the people she loved were threatened. Carla had been right about one thing. I was tougher than anyone gave me credit for. I just wished she'd figured that out before she'd tried to destroy my family. The truth had indeed set us free, all of us. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.